Attention Deficit Hyperactivity
Your
Disorder.
ADHD.
ADHD. Someone in your family has ADHD.
The Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder.
ADHD diagnosis.
Dealing with ADHD.
Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder.
Treatment of ADHD.
Struggles with ADHD.
When you think of the term ADHD, what exactly comes to mind?
Discussions on this particular topic have existed in the scientific literature for over a century now, and its analysis still remains hot topic coming into 2023.
As the debate thickens around identification, treatment, and the ever-rising number of individual cases, now more than ever, it's vital to gain a grasp of this evolving topic. I am, of course, talking about Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD.
12% of the US population is now diagnosed with ADHD, and the real undiagnosed number is expected to be much higher. A concerning discovery has arisen from studies ran by Russell Barkley, an internationally recognized authority in this area, and it's shown that ADHD can shave up to 13 years off of an individual's lifespan due to its associated negative lifestyle choices, making ADHD a bigger killer than diabetes, cigarettes, obesity, and high cholesterol combined in the US.
This isn't just a label to hand out to lazy kids that are eating too much sugar, playing too many video games, and raising hell in their classrooms. This is a serious disorder, and as we'll find out in this video, it's not all that it's made out to be.
For those living with undiagnosed ADHD, finding out that they're not alone and allowing them the opportunity to learn more about their condition can be life-changing. Additionally, a more informed friend, family member, or colleague can help to support an individual with ADHD, as well as contextualize seemingly irregular behaviors. Put simply, more knowledge around ADHD can be the difference between a fulfilled life and a lost one.
I invite you to join me in this video series, where we ask the simple yet unaddressed questions that surround attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This video has been made for and made by the enthusiastic layman looking to shed a little bit more light on a topic that could eventually affect all of our lives.
In this video, we look at the identification of ADHD, the brain areas that are thought to be affected, and why more and more people in the Western world are being diagnosed with it every year.
My name's Lewis McSwarren, and this video has been made for your eyes only. The person who knows has nothing to learn. So for uncovering more about ADHD, we need to keep an open mind and learn from as many sources as possible.
Whilst making this video, as well as the following 4 in this series, I have pulled on many sources, often with contradictory opinions and ideas about the cause, treatment, and identification of ADHD in any individual. I tend to piece together these sources to reveal the bigger picture of this so-called disorder and what it means to have an attention deficit in the modern world. The ADHD story begins in 1904, where it's first mentioned in the scientific literature. Initially simply called Attention Deficit Disorder, or ADD, before changing permanently to be known as ADHD, with the addition of hyperactivity around the mid to late 1980s. This was to help with identification and better describe the link between those with poor attention and a surplus of energy. There is confusion as some still refer to ADD, but it is in fact the exact same disorder. There are, however, 3 subtypes of ADHD. The first, predominantly inattentive. The second, predominantly hyperactive or impulsive. And the third, called combined type, a combination of the first 2. The inattentive and hyperactive types each have 9 traits, and of these 9, 6 need to be present in children under 16, and 5 of these must be present in those over 17. If you meet the baseline of conditions in both inattentive and hyperactive types, you have the third ADHD type, combined. The details of this are not extremely important for our analysis, but an important takeaway from this is that all of these are subjectively diagnosed. There are certain additional conditions that all types must meet, such as the symptoms must have been evident for more than 6 months, and several symptoms must have appeared before the age of 12 with evidence, but there is no clear-cut test for ADHD.
it cannot be detected in the genes, and although interesting fMRI brain scans are showing some interesting results, there's no concrete signal for ADHD. Keep this in mind as we ask further questions.
Females are thought to be the most underdiagnosed group struggling with ADHD, mostly because many girls and women seem not to show the easily identifiable trait of hyperactivity. This does not mean they are dealing with a diluted version of the disorder and its impact, merely they are fighting a silent battle and less likely to receive help. This is yet another reason information about ADHD is so important, and help should be made more accessible within schools and healthcare systems. Right now in the UK, the wait is 2 or more years for diagnosis in adults, and some sources say it can be double or triple this time before treatment can be prescribed. This strikes me as a slow process for a problem that can have such devastating consequences. Attention is merely perception. It is how we filter and perceive the world around us. There are any number of stimuli around you and I at any one time, but our ability to prioritize these stimuli and center our attention is often underrated.
To understand further the mind of someone with ADHD, we must first change our own perceptions and attempt to view the world through their eyes.
Picture the uni student working from his flat that convinces himself that 2 hours spent organising his record collection by release date should take priority over the essay he has due at 10 AM the next day. The little girl who can't seem to get dressed for school in the morning without being distracted by her favourite dolls that she hadn't finished playing with the night before. The businesswoman who has so many relevant and exploding thoughts during her conversations at work that she simply can't help but interrupt the person she's speaking with in case she forgets a brilliant idea. The man that comes home with a new impulse purchase or passion project seemingly every week, his home filled with forgotten interests, rooms half painted, bikes half repaired, and various musical instruments gathering dust. Impulsive, disorganized, daydreamer, rude, tactless, careless, forgetful, motormouth, clumsy, irresponsible, emotional, agitated, aggressive, fidgeter, always on the move, inconsistent, loud, but sometimes hyper-focused, inspired, great under time pressure, and amazing when the stakes are high. The quiet passenger in a meeting that suddenly tunes in with a brilliant idea. Why can't you play guitar for 6 hours, do marathon gaming sessions, and come up with so many great business ideas, but can't write your uni essay?
A well-documented torture of those with ADHD is bursts of intense passion for their favourite topics and a complete inability to focus or concentrate on relatively mundane or boring tasks.
Their attention deficit floats away if they're either engaged in an activity that highly intrigues them internally, or they feel a large external motivation, either from a situation of real danger or an imminent deadline.
To fully understand what attention is, we need to look at the neurological story and decipher what attention is meant to look like in the neurotypical mind. From here, we'll be able to work backwards and work out what's different about the ADHD mind. I think we could be in for a surprise.
In the neurotypical mind, in other words, a mind that is not experiencing any diversion of attention, there are 2 main neural networks that control focus. Both can be found in the prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain, and more specifically are found within your right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex.
Now, if you think I've lost you, stay with me for a second. This is the official way of saying the area of your brain directly behind your right eye.
Our prefrontal cortex is the most developed compared to any other mammal. Through evolution, we have developed our brains most in this area. We have near double the prefrontal cortex size of an ape. If you're unfortunate enough to damage this part of the brain in an accident, impulse control, personality traits, and working memory would all be at risk of impairment. The prefrontal cortex plays a huge role in what's called executive control. It's the part of the brain that got you out of bed this morning, controlling our ability to action physical and mental functions at will. One of these functions is our ability to focus.
The 2 neural networks that I mentioned earlier can be found in this area, and this is where things start to get interesting. When concentrating on a task, our brains use what is called the task positive network, and when in idle rest, our brains use what is called the default mode network.
This task network and default network in the neurotypical mind work in an anti-correlated fashion, meaning that when one is on, the other is off, much like the up and down of a seesaw. When focusing deeply on a particular subject, you're in the task network, extremely engaged. Hunger and emotions are left behind, along with time perception. You may be familiar with the term flow. Everything is just right, and you can complete any task without distraction. As you can imagine, this takes up a lot of energy, so you will at some point want to come out of this state of hyperfocus back into the default mode. Now you may be thinking, why on earth would I ever want to come out of this focused state? I'm so productive and efficient. Well, it turns out the unimaginatively named default mode is where the imagination comes alive. In this mode, you can engage emotionally with other people. You have the ability to access your autobiographical memory, your past memories, as well as create future projections, conjuring up new and creative ideas from thin air. In fact, you can test the difference between these focus modes right now whilst watching this video.
If you're looking directly at me in your screen, you're currently activating your task mode. You're engaged with just one source. Now keep looking at me, but allow your awareness to widen in your peripheral vision. While still looking at me, you're suddenly aware of the room around you and your presence within it. Now you may find there might be new noises that you previously hadn't noticed, from either inside the room or outside.
Before you were like a blinkered horse, and now your peripheral vision has broadened, and what was capturing your full attention is now merely one element in a much busier and more complex space. You can imagine that the task network is vital when it comes to reading a book that's in front of you. But if you happen to find yourself in the African plain being hunted by a lion, having this tunnel vision while scanning the details of every direction, trying to find your hunter one slice at a time, could be fatal. In fact, defocusing your vision and spreading your attention, looking for movement and any shapes with four legs and a tail would be a much better survival technique.
Ahead of losing your focus to other distractions, let's now take a look at how this information can help our understanding of ADHD.
When viewing the world through the default mode network, our wide perspective allows us to access past memories, emotions, and ideas. Seemingly unconnected information can simultaneously piece together and map many different thoughts at once, sparking new ideas. In addition, and perhaps more importantly, in the default network, we can project these ideas forward in imaginative thinking, attempting to predict probable future outcomes in the coming hours, weeks, and years into the future. This type of thinking pattern is called divergent thinking and is the key to out-of-the-box, non-linear, creative thinking. Divergent thinking invites simultaneous sources of information to come together and map out new inspired ideas. The hacker, the entrepreneur, and the artist thrive in divergent thinking patterns, and it seems so does the ADHD mind. The flip side of this pattern, convergent thinking, is associated with the task-positive network we encountered earlier. Lasered, logical, and sequential thinking is the theme here. This thinking pattern is great for solving problems with single answers, and does so by strategically eliminating possible solutions until only one remains. This is the kind of executive mind that many of us crave, including those with ADHD. But what if this was your only state of thinking? What if you had laser focus 24/7 and you only thought in logical and efficient patterns? Well, let me introduce you to the yin to the ADHD yang. It's called Attention Surplus Disorder. Yes, there's such a thing as having too much focus. Individuals with ASD are highly stimulated by mundane tasks, can focus well even when they're in a disruptive environment, and are extremely detail-orientated. If you're anything like me, you may find this hard to imagine, and may even feel a quiet but deep bubble of jealousy when thinking about this so-called disorder. But this feeling may disappear when you discover that too much focus isn't all it's made out to be. These individuals tend to be uncreative, lacking in a sense of humor, and low in emotional sensitivity. Interestingly, these are all traits that someone with ADHD can express when they're treated with stimulant medication, but that's for another video. The divergent thinking pattern of the ADHD mind clearly has overwhelming potential. Consider this quote from philosopher Plato. "What that man creates by means of reason will pale before the art of inspired beings." What I believe he is celebrating here is an internal muse, the source of inspiration that becomes creative individuals, be the fruitful collision between past emotions, current thoughts, and future ideas. Individuals with ADHD have access to this powerful creative source as a result of a life experienced through the lens of divergent thinking patterns, sculpted by the unpredictable topography of the default mode network. However, as we know, the modern world struggles to account for what cannot measure. The creative imagination and alternate thinking patterns of the ADHD individual as a divergent thinker are often overlooked in a world pressured by deadlines, results, and questions designed for only a single answer. What makes the situation worse for the individual labeled with ADHD is their seeming inability to turn this divergent thinking off. Their source of unquantifiable power is also their greatest downfall when placed in modern society. Their inability to complete prescribed work and divergence from social norms can sadly have them labeled as stupid, unproductive, or worse, lazy. It takes only the analysis of that last word, lazy, to gain a full picture of the untenable reality ADHD individuals face. It's the word used when a particular body has lost control over an individual, a toxic word that mixes shame, failure, and fear. When cast in the direction of someone who has no control over their attention, the only outcome is a mind starved of self-esteem and a heart full of anxiety. If not avoided or attended to, this low bar of self-confidence paired with an imagination that paints effortlessly in the past, present, and future opens up a downward spiral of what-ifs. Projections of implemented ideas become visions of judgment and non-existent fears, leading to overwhelm and a paralyzing self-doubt. Too long dancing to the drum of the muse leads to worn souls. The tortured creative comes to mind. Mark Twain once said, "I have known great many troubles, but most of them have never happened." It's clear that ADHD individuals are stuck in the divergent thinking patterns of the default mode network. But how are neurotypical people able to switch out of it? Both of these modes have their benefits and flaws, but how do you flick the switch? Is there a magic word that no one has told them? There is, in fact, a controller for the switch that moves you between these modes. It's called dopamine. You might have heard of it. Dopamine controls your focus levels much like an air traffic controller. As one plane takes off, another is free to land. The traffic controller's communication is key for the one-in, one-out system to work when necessary. The problem, however, is if the air traffic controller falls asleep.
We broke the story of that air traffic controller alone and falling asleep on the job. 2 planes having to land in Washington, D.C. without any help.
If dopamine levels are low, traffic is free-flowing between the two modes, and instead of the anti-correlation that we usually see, both the task and the default modes become correlated, turning on and off at the same time.
So you're aware the tower is apparently not manned. We've made a few phone calls, nobody's answering.
The synchronization of these two modes is what's thought to occur in the ADHD individual. Low dopamine level prevents them from effectively switching between the task-positive network and the default mode network. 2 planes are trying to land simultaneously, but there's no one controlling them and there's no one communicating with them. Dopamine controls motivation, executive functions, and focus. A lack of it can lead to detrimental effects. Those with ADHD are 5 to 10 times more likely to suffer from addictions. They have an increased suicide rate and risk for accidental harm. 2/3 of those with ADHD have a reduced life expectancy of up to 21 years. Unfortunately, scientists only really found out about these low dopamine levels and the potential for the use of stimulants in the treatment for ADHD following the link between individuals with poor attention and them self-medicating with substance abuse. It is thought that these individuals are desperately trying to raise their dopamine levels via the strongest and most available sources to control and rebalance their focus networks. The vast majority of ADHD prescriptions and medications are stimulant drugs, raising dopamine in the individual to help them control their default mode and task-positive networks, indicating that traditional doctrines pointing at ADHD kids as merely a product of too much sugar and a poor diet learned from ill-informed parenting are utterly misguided. In fact, these young people are intensely craving the dopamine boost from sugar, needing to control their scattered minds, subconsciously trying to find respite from their exploding thoughts, as a result becoming hyperactive when they finally get the sugar. The list of potential dopamine sources is limited when you're young, but as an adult, the ocean of both legal and illegal options for self-medication is vast. Excessive coffee drinking, cigarette smoking, extreme sports, over-exercising, gambling, compulsive shopping, social media, food and sex addictions, all within the legal realms of an adult to get lost in, before even mentioning the illegal and more potent options. Lower dopamine levels within people with ADHD also explain why they're only able to focus on topics they're interested in and perform under high-stress environments where adrenaline kicks in, naturally raising dopamine levels. It also illuminates the impulsivity of those with ADHD that we see in spontaneous purchases and a desire for movement in space. They're in a constant hunt for novelty, and its accompanied dopamine hit.
And if watching this video, you live in a world where there are plenty of places to find some.
Your attention is an asset you choose to either save or pay, and there are many sources seeking a donation. They've worked out they can get to you efficiently by trading an economical dopamine boost. The fear-mongering news presenters, short clips in social media, display ads, and the branded products subconsciously registered in our daily lives that scream for our attention at any price, using dopamine as their currency. Your attention has value. Your focus is a monetizable entity. Hollywood no longer needs to construct rich narratives or grapple with thought-provoking content. The money flows to quickly produce politically charged drama that makes headlines and turns heads both on and off the set. Clickbait articles flood our social media feeds. News channels appear convinced that breaking news is upon us every minute.
If dopamine is increased, as is focus, but in our high adrenaline and dopamine-filled lives, we can overstimulate our dopamine receptors, taking them to new highs. But what goes up must come down. Our dopamine supplies work from a baseline that's likely slightly different from those around you and can change over time.
Dopamine acts in waves, moving above and below our baseline. For every upward wave, there is an equal drop below our baseline. If we experience a large dopamine boost, we will also experience an equal low, unless propped up by another subsequent high. The danger arrives when dopamine is abused and raised high over the baseline on a consistent basis. One of the less talked about ways this can happen is by pairing dopamine sources together. For example, you could watch TV and see a dopamine increase, but if you watch TV while eating a pizza, another dopamine hit, it's even better at the time, but you will experience a greater low. Now imagine if you add a fizzy drink and a quick scroll of social media during the ad breaks. The drop is going to be exponentially higher when it eventually comes, leaving you scrambling to double up on a different source or hunting for a more potent one at any cost, just to bring you back up to baseline. With so many dopamine sources at our fingertips, as well as the parties calling our name and trying to manipulate our focus, it's easy to see how levels can spiral out of control. Someone with ADHD, only seeking relief between their task and default mode network, may be more likely to abuse these addictive substances. However, we should not demonize dopamine. We do need at least some level of dopamine to function at all. It plays an important role in our daily functions. For example, tragically, in Parkinson's disease, it's the loss of dopamine-releasing nerve cells in the part of the brain called the substantia nigra that leads to reduced regulation of body movement.
So based on what we know now about the neural networks, we need some dopamine, but there is potential for overindulgence. The question then becomes, if abused, can we drop and fluctuate our dopamine levels enough to cause ADHD-like symptoms?
Can anyone get ADHD even as an adult? If we can vary our dopamine levels, can you and I suffer from an attention deficit? Like the frog that can't detect the increasing temperature of the water that surrounds it until it's boiled alive, I believe that we too are unaware of the slow evaporation of our attention reserves. And I'm not the only one. The big book by the American Psychiatric Association, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 5th edition, now recognizes such a condition. It's named Variable Attention Stimulus Trait, VAST, and describes a cousin to ADHD that is learnt amongst the modern life. Unhelpfully, it is even less of a rigid diagnosis than ADHD and completely up for interpretation. There is no minimum number of symptoms that, as you recall, even ADHD's flimsy diagnosis required. Even more perplexingly is the positive spin that is given to VAST over ADHD. You'll find all kinds of articles promoting its benefits, which is amazing as we're recognizing the benefits of a creative mind, but actually, in reality, it's rather worrying considering it's simply a learnt version of ADHD, accompanied by its negative as well as positive baggage.
Surely it'd be more appropriate not to either praise or degrade either side of the focus scale, divergent or convergent thinking, but to teach individuals how to use the switch that exists in between them. Our focus should be appreciated, not rinsed and reused.
It seems glaring that society would benefit from education on dopamine abuse at schools. Is it not absurd that we're not more concerned about the source of many of the medical and economical issues that individuals face? Dopamine abuse. Should we not only teach why too many calories are bad for our bodies, but why your mind might be craving that extra treat in the first place? Would a doctor not see better long-term results from teaching patients about the dangers of doubling up on dopamine sources when they report with attention deficit symptoms instead of prescribing more dopamine in the form of ADHD meds?
I'm no doctor or teacher, and I do not know the answers to these questions. Nevertheless, although increasingly difficult in a culture that craves short-term results, I do believe that more time should be taken to consider the long-term implications of our monetized, attention-commanding world and the effects that it may have on our creative minds.
I think you'll agree that it's vital to be acutely aware of the impact ADHD can have on the lives of individuals that live with it and those that are in contact with someone that does. The important thing is that anyone that has or thinks they have ADHD seeks help from the relevant medical body in their own country. Trying to self-diagnose or diagnose others is dangerous, and I certainly do not recommend doing so.
We can, however, all assess the growing diagnosis numbers across the Western world and consider if this raises alarm bells for the culture and society that we're pushing. Are we forsaking creative minds in a consuming world enchanted by results? Is there a hedonistic culture chasing dopamine right off the end of a cliff?
The next logical step in our journey is to ask more about the source of ADHD. We're told that ADHD is one of the most heritable conditions of the modern day, but knowing what we know now about the fragility of our focus is pointing the finger at genetics merely a cursory answer to a much more complex reality.
Join me now in this next step, asking further questions about the source of ADHD, genetics or the environment. My name's Lewis McSporran, and if you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my Brilliant Brain channel. Hit like, and I'll see you in the next video.